Welcome back to another Explainer, everyone. I'm seriously so excited to dive into this one with you today because we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating contrasts in human behavior under intense pressure. We're going to break down this crazy 50-hour Antarctic survival challenge that a creator and his crew took on. What we're really examining here is that exact weird intersection where deadly life-or-death logistics meet, well, completely childish coping mechanisms. As you'll see, extreme environments don't just push us to our physical limits, they literally push us right into sheer absurdity.
I woke up coughing up blood. I mean, wow, right? And here's the crazy part. That wasn't uttered on day 10 or day 20. This was the visceral, horrific physical toll of waking up after just one single night in the coldest place on Earth. You know, when we think about extreme survival, we usually picture this epic hero's journey. But the reality? It's immediate, and it is absolutely brutal. The human body violently rejects this frozen environment from literally the very first hour.
The psychological stakes here were inescapable from the second they landed. The exact moment that drop-off plane leaves and you hear its engine hum away into the distance, they are completely stranded. There is literally no way out for the next 50 hours. And to add just a massive layer of psychological torture to the whole shebang, the sun never sets. You've got a team of totally exhausted guys stuck in 24/7 sunlight, throwing off their circadian rhythms completely. Night one was incredibly rough, just because their bodies had absolutely no clue it was actually time to sleep.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1. Welcome to the ice.
So, before you could even think about surviving 50 hours, you have to survive the first few minutes. The temperature on the ice when they arrived was a punishing -30 degrees, and if that wasn't bad enough, it rapidly dropped another 20 degrees as a sudden blizzard rolled in right as they got there. Just imagine trying to coordinate a team while the wind is literally howling in your ears, threatening to blow your only shelter, your tents, completely away. The threat of freezing to death was right there in their faces, and they needed shelter ASAP.
So how exactly do you prevent your base camp from becoming a giant kite? Well, building what they dubbed Camp Beast required some intensely grueling physical labor. First off, they had to trek towards the mountains just to get a basic buffer from the wind. Then they had to cut these heavy, massive ice and snow blocks to manually build a perimeter wall to keep the camp safe. And finally, they had to secure the tents at a very specific angle just to prevent total wind destruction. In their own words, it was by far the hardest thing they had ever done, all just to make sure their shelter wouldn't literally fly away into the blizzard.
Moving on to Section 2, Surviving the Elements.
Just stepping outside the tent required this ridiculously bulky and exhausting process. Okay, so you start with long pants and a long-sleeve shirt. Then you add a second and a third pair of pants, a jacket, and then a jacket for your jacket. You need a ski mask and goggles specifically so your eyeballs don't freeze solid in your skull. You need gloves, and then, you guessed it, gloves for your gloves. And honestly, the craziest part, despite having all of this on, you can still get frostbite. The sheer amount of calories you burn just trying to get dressed is absolutely staggering.
Once you're actually dressed, well, the bizarre daily routine adjustments really kick in. Imagine having to boil snow for 10 straight minutes just to heat up and eat a basic MRE. And what about going to the bathroom? Yeah, you can't exactly just step outside and pee in the snow. They had to spend 5 minutes just trying to pee into bottles at -20 degrees inside the tent. And there was one horrifyingly crucial rule. Never, ever, ever confuse the pee bottle with the drinking water. And for anything else, you have to trek away from the camp through a literal blizzard to a designated poop tent with a bucket. The contrast here between serious life-threatening survival and the crew's comedic biological misery is just fascinating.
Let's pivot a bit here. Section 3, Climbing Mount Shopify.
Because, merely surviving just wasn't enough, right? The group's leader, Jimmy, decided he wanted to conquer an unnamed mountain in the distance, simply because fewer than 10 people on Earth have ever stepped foot there. And the stakes were absolute. As he put it, if I fall backwards, I roll for 2,000 feet. This was not some casual afternoon hike. They were navigating a sea of slippery ice right next to a massive cliff. If they fell, they died. It was sheer terror. They literally had to hook up to one another so that if one guy slipped, the other could act as a human anchor. The physical risk here is absolutely real.
Let's quickly trace the timeline of this grueling 4.5-hour ascent. At hour 1, they're navigating that terrifying, slippery sea of ice. Fast forward to hour 4.5. After fighting exhaustion and dodging deadly drops, they finally reach the summit. So at hour 30 of their 50-hour challenge, they actually claimed the peak and named it Shopify Mountain to honor the platform that helped build their business. But here's the absolute cruelest irony of all. Because of Antarctica's incredibly strict rules, They planted their flag to celebrate, only to immediately have to pull it right back out of the ground to pack it up and carry it all the way back down. No way.
Okay, now for my favorite part. Section 4, Operation Hole. Now, what's really interesting here is the absolute peak of contrasting human behavior. On one hand, you have Jimmy and a crew member out there dodging 2,000-foot deadly drops to conquer an unnamed mountain, pushing themselves to the absolute physical limit. On the other hand, the rest of the crew, who were left alone back at camp, decided to spend over 20 hours digging an 8-foot deep trench in the snow, doing absolutely nothing productive, and literally giggling while spelling out ICUP in the ice. It is sheer, comical pointlessness. I mean, they could have fortified the camp, they could have cooked meals, or just rested. But instead, they chose the hole.
So picture this. Jimmy returns at 4 a.m., utterly exhausted, having just completed the hardest thing he's ever done in his life. He totally expects his crew to be fast asleep. Instead, he finds them sitting at the bottom of an 8-foot ice hole, freezing cold, telling him, "We're just trying to, make use of our time." And what exactly were they doing with that time? Sitting in the hole, passing around an iPad and watching a video titled "Blind Man Sees for the First Time." It's just this incredible, hilarious look at how, when stripped of all normal stimuli, the human brain will invent the absolute most ridiculous ways to cope with boredom and misery.
Which brings us to the frantic final morning. Section 5. Leave no trace.
All that exhaustion from 50 freezing hours suddenly collided with an ultimate deadline. Pack perfectly or miss the only flight out. I really want you to imagine the mental fortitude required for this. You have absolutely zero energy left. It's incredibly difficult to even unzip your sleeping bag. And yet, you have to pack up an entirely frozen camp while racing against a literal plane engine humming in the distance. If you miss this flight, you are stuck in the freezing cold for another whole day. The pressure is just immense.
And their ultimate rule out there? Leave nothing behind. The crew actually had a really deep dedication to preserving the untouched beauty of Antarctica. They couldn't leave a single trace of Camp East, so that meant frantically packing up those heavily fortified tents, tearing down all the ice walls they built, and yes, it literally meant spending their very last ounces of energy filling in that giant, absurd 8-foot hole they had dug for no reason. They had to put everything exactly back how it was before, full-on sprinting to the runway.
Which leaves us with a final thought to wrap up this explainer. If you were dropped at the absolute bottom of the earth, battling extreme cold, severe sleep deprivation, and sheer isolation, what would you do? Would you push yourself to the absolute brink to climb the mountain and leave a legacy? Or would you surrender to the absurdity, grab a shovel, and just dig the hole? It really challenges our own instincts of survival and sanity. Think about which side of the ice you'd fall on. Thanks so much for joining me for this breakdown, everyone, and I will catch you in the next explainer.